Hi everyone, welcome back to my craft room. The crafting videos for Jester have begun, and even though I made this part of the cosplay last, I'm starting with her giant spiritual weapon, Lollipop. In the video, I'm going to show you how I made this Lollipop, how I made it collapsible for travel, and if you watched my ALA vlog, how I fixed it after I broke it. Props are not my strongest suit in cosplay, but I am really proud of this one. I think it turned out looking so cool. Honestly, it was pretty easy. Total time for this, maybe like 2 weeks. The Lollipop itself is pretty durable. No paint chipping to worry about. So let's go back in time to when I started working on my spiritual weapon. Let's make a prop. I love it when I don't have to reinvent the wheel, and other Jester cosplayers invented the pool noodle spiritual weapon Lollipop. So that's what I'm doing. If I had even an ounce of foresight, I would have gotten these at the end of the summer, but I didn't. So here we are, finding pool noodles in the middle of December. Kind of tricky. We're gonna move over to the table. My lights have fallen down once again. I'm not gonna worry about it until after ALA. I'm choosing to not worry about it. Please welcome back to the channel Electric Knife that my mom donated because it kind of sucks. I'm gonna be rolling up these pool noodles, and as you can see, it doesn't like roll into a nice, delicate spiral very well. So I'm just gonna very carefully, of course, do one of these. Confidence, wow. That will roll up quite a bit nicer. I cut off a little chunk of pool noodle to wrap the tapered edge of the long pool noodle around so it would spiral nicely. Hot glue works great with this kind of foam since there's a bunch of nooks and crannies for it to sink into. Contact cement would probably also work, but since all of this will be getting covered, I didn't need to worry about it looking super clean. I used some wooden skewers to help hold stuff in place while the glue cooled. I also realized that everything would roll a lot neater if I flattened out one of the sides, and with the electric knife, it was very easy to do that. Then I just rolled it all up with hot glue. Low temperature worked a little better than high temperature glue because high temperature kind of melted the foam a little. I used about 2 3/4 pool noodles for the whole Lollipop. All right, here's my Lollipop. It looks bad right here, but that's okay. We're gonna fix it. This is about as big as I can make it before it stops fitting in my suitcase, and it needs to fit in a suitcase. So now to make the Lollipop stick, I went into the garage, happened to have this, already checked it for spiders, and we're good. So in this ugly part, that's where I'm gonna insert the PVC pipe. Cute so far, we'll see how it goes. I laid my PVC pipe on that ugly part of my Lollipop and marked the width of it. I used a box cutter to try and hollow out the inner rings of the Lollipop as best as I could, and then just shoved the PVC pipe in there with a ton of hot glue to secure it. And then I repaired that outer ring of the Lollipop with a little extra chunk of pool noodle. I wanted the center of the Lollipop to have a nice round shape, so I 3D printed a dome for each side and glued it to that center pool noodle that everything is wrapped around. I am not a huge fan of foam clay, but sometimes it has its uses, and I used some foam clay worms in the cracks of the noodles to fill in and smooth out the shape. I also wanted to put glue on the Lollipop later, and I thought that the glue would adhere better to the foam clay than it would to the giant sponge. I was just working with this thing with the entire length of the PVC pipe, and that was a huge pain, so I used my suitcase to measure where I needed to cut my Lollipop stick so I could fly with it. Now that this is no longer a nightmare to maneuver, it's time to cover up the pool noodles. I think trying to prime and paint the pool noodles would go poorly since the noodles are so porous, and since they're so flexible, the paint would for sure just crack right off. So I opted to sew a cover for my Lollipop out of this metallic microdot spandex. I whipped up a pattern for my spandex to make that nice peppermint candy twirl with my pink and purple fabric. Perfect for Jester. I sewed all of the spandex pattern pieces together for both sides of the Lollipop, which took forever and was very tricky because I was essentially quilting spandex. But look how cute that turned out. I sewed the two halves right sides together around about 2/3 of the circumference of the circle so I could still slide it onto the pool noodle base, and it looked so good. Time for some garage crafting because I'm busting out the chemicals. I 3D printed these PVC pipe connectors with files from the Dangerous Ladies. They twist lock together so you can break down long props. And I epoxied those baddies into the PVC. PPE check, wear your respirator. I used a lot of the epoxy to really set them in there. Now to attach the fabric cover to the noodles. I put contact cement on the foam clay. I did do a test with a scrap of noodle to make sure that the contact cement wasn't going to melt this type of foam or anything. And then I did a very thin layer on my fabric cover to make sure it wasn't going to bleed through. I slid my cover onto the noodles and pressed the fabric onto the contact cemented areas. It worked okay, not as well as I had hoped. I even put a trash bag over the cover and vacuumed out all of the air to try and compress the fabric to the noodles. Unwrapping the trash bag, it wasn't totally awful, it mostly worked. To make the fabric sink into those valleys more, I used some dressmaker pins and just shoved them down into the fabric and foam. This made it easier to stretch the fabric over the noodles, and they're fairly invisible against the micro dots. If I did this over again, I wouldn't even glue it, I'd just use the pins. Then I hand sewed the open part of the cover shut. If Jester needs one thing, it's sparkle, and I wanted this prop to really dazzle everyone from the stage, so I decided to rhinestone it with pink and purple rhinestones. 8,000 of them, in fact. I kept the pink rhinestones on the pink fabric and the purple rhinestones on the purple fabric and followed the swirl of the lollipop. I used Aleene's Jewelette glue and it worked great. I really need to get a different rhinestone placer though, because this one holds onto them a little too well. When I got the swirl done, I just scattered them around the lollipop. I love rhinestoning. It was very chill. We're 10 days out, everything in the craft room is a huge disaster, but the prop looks great. The sparkle is so beautiful. I'll need to take a little video in lower light, but I can see reflecting in the mirror behind me. Oh, this thing is gonna rule on stage. So now I need to finish covering up the rest of the stick. You can see I have already done it on the bottom. What I'm using to cover up the stick, if I can get this out, is some double-sided sticky Gorilla Tape and also some sparkly Christmas ribbon. Because it's Gorilla Tape, like, it's not gonna go anywhere, and I didn't want there to be any like weird glue bumps or bleed through on anything. I do want to connect these two together so I can at least somewhat match the direction of the ribbon. Just hit my camera, great. Yeah, I think today I'll totally be able to finish though, so let's get started. Step 1 was wrapping my section of the lollipop stick in the ribbon so I could figure out how much I needed. This ribbon sheds glitter so bad, I fear I will never escape it. My ribbon has wire in it and I want it out, so I used some pliers to pull it out. My mom decorated wedding cakes as a kid and I remember watching her pull the wire out of ribbon before she'd wrap it around cakes, so doing this makes me think of her. Very fun. I wrapped my Gorilla Tape around the PVC pipe and I focused more on getting it totally wrinkle-free than I did on eliminating gaps between the tape. The tape wasn't flexible enough to fully cover the pipe without a lot of wrinkling. But that was okay. It ended up looking super cool underneath the ribbon since the ribbon wasn't totally opaque. I am pulling the ribbon super tight across the tape as I take the plastic off so it adheres well and looks nice and smooth, and I just trimmed the extra ribbon off the ends. I really liked how this turned out. The candy striping effect is super cool, and then all that was left was a little bit of final decorating. I found the perfect ribbon for Jester. It's pink and sparkly and it has sprinkles on it. I used a little more double-sided tape to attach a base of the ribbon to the lollipop and used more ribbon to make a nice big bow. I did put a few hand stitches in the middle of the bow to keep it holding together. I added some tails, reinforced the center tie with some hand sewing, and then decided it needed more, so I stitched it to the back of some glittery silver mesh ribbon and then hand sewed that together. The friction from all the glitter keeps it pretty firmly in place, and that finished off Jester's spiritual weapon. If you watched my ALA vlog, you would have seen that this broke right here at a connection point when it fell over, and it was honestly a pretty easy fix. All I did was use my PVC pipe cutters and I just cut off the areas that the broken connectors were glued into and just replaced the connectors. I lost like 4.5 inches of prop, but it's still very tall. I'm not that worried about
the height. Also, if you don't want to use epoxy and you want to use an inside glue, the original Gorilla Clear Glue worked really well. No problems on the glue front. If I did do this over again, I would reprint the connectors in PET G instead of PLA because PET G is a lot less brittle and it's stronger. I just don't have any PET G, but now I will get some. If I were to make this prop over again, I would just skip contact cementing the fabric to the pool noodle base and just go straight for the dress pins. There's a couple spots I covered them in rhinestones. That was strategic on my part, that I just had some contact cement bleed through so you could see a little bit of yellow on the pink especially. And it didn't stick like that well, so I don't know, if you're gonna do this, you can skip that part. Also, something I never would have expected or thought about, I live at altitude, I'm in the mountains, so when I brought this down to sea level in California, the pool noodles had less air in them. The air was not as expanded, and it made my cover wrinkly, which like was annoying, but there was nothing I could do about it, so like whatever. But think about that, if you're going from a higher altitude to a lower altitude, your fabric cover is not gonna look as nice. I'm sure I'm the only one that really noticed that, but keep it in mind. Overall, this is the best prop I have made by far. Normally when I make props, it's kind of an afterthought, but when I was applying for the ALA Masquerade, I put in my application that I was going to be making this spiritual weapon to force myself to do it nice, because I know in a competition, a messy prop can really count against you more than no prop at all. So I worked really hard to make sure this was like clean and nice. I'm pretty pleased with it. So that is my spiritual weapon video. If you're making one of your own, good luck. I hope this video was helpful. Coming up next on my channel are the crafting videos for the actual outfit for Jester, so subscribe if you want to see those. They're on the way. If you want to see what I'm working on right now, you can find me on Instagram at oneemilys, and I'm also on TikTok. And with that, I will see you next time. Bye!